New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Hi, it's Leanne Whitney, guest host at New Thinking Aloud. You are warmly invited to visit transformationandintegration.com to access additional resources that support the journey through deep transformation and to learn more about the ongoing offerings at Center for Transformation and Integration, including our certified training in transformational coaching with an emphasis in somatic integration therapy. I look forward to welcoming you there.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Leanne Whitney, guest host working alongside host Jeffrey Mishlove, co-host Emmy Vadnais, and my other colleagues here at New Thinking Aloud. Today, I'm excited to welcome Christopher Key Chapple back to the show. Chris Chapple is Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology and founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. He earned his BA at Stony Brook University and an MA and PhD at Fordham University in New York City. Chris joined the faculty of LMU in 1985. He has published more than 20 books, edited volumes, as well as single-author studies, including Yoga and the Luminous, Patanjali's Spiritual Path to Freedom, and Thinking with the Yoga Sutra, Translation and Interpretation. Chris serves on various advisory boards throughout the world, including the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, the Jain Studies Center in London, the Dharma Academy of North America in Berkeley, and the International School for Jain Studies in Delhi. In this interview, Chris and I discuss the Yoga Darshana, the vision of yoga, holography, psychic abilities, remote viewing, past lives, both the ascending and descending aspects of yoga practice, and samadhi. Chris is joining me remotely from his office at Loyola Marymount University, and now I will switch over to the internet interview. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining me again back on the show. Nice to be with you.
Good to be here, Leanne. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, last time we talked, you had mentioned that your mother had participated in the research at Duke University for J.B. Rhine. And of course, psychic abilities are a significant part of the Yoga Darshana, the vision of yoga, in that you can't get away from them, really, because Patanjali is, could we say, presenting a holographic reality. It's like a reality close to what maybe David Bohm and Karl Pribram were pointing to. So, yes, I'm curious to hear what you learned at a really young age from your mom as she participated in that research. And then let's expand that out into the Yoga Darshana.
Yes, I am reminded of the all-important terms of the implicate order of the all, as well as what Rupert Sheldrake articulated as morphic fields. And in his groundbreaking research, which was both plant and animal-based, he saw that as something is learned, all of a sudden everybody seems to know it. And this sort of rising up of an intuitive knowledge, or what in Sanskrit is called pratibha, is enhanced and actually facilitated through the practices of yoga. And the Patanjali Yoga Sutra divided into three parts. The first part, samadhi. Okay, what is this moment where it all comes together and understanding the past, the present, moving forward into a clear future? What are the practices we need to get there? And what, number three, practices to get there are the second chapter. And then in 3, this remarkable concatenation of the psychic and the physical powers that arise with the performance of yoga. Chapter 4, all in service of freedom. So when I was a little boy, my mother shared, as she did throughout her life, but only once in a while, she had been part of a psychic ability talent search in the 1930s. And she was a very intelligent young woman. She'd gone off to university when she was 16 years old. And the research unit for J.B. Rhine at Duke University invited her and people, college students from all over the country, to take up residence for a period of time. And they did a systematic, let's say, face-off, but then it wasn't. It was behind a screen, then it was in a different room, and then a different building, then even a different city. But they timed this test where one person would put face up a series of cards. One would have a square, one would have a circle, one would have a squiggle, one would have a triangle, and then name the order in which these cards appeared, and visualize, think, and then the other person would write down the order that they were receiving. With some people, it just didn't happen. But with some particular alignments, it was very, very, very close to 100%, certainly far more than would be normal with randomization. And there was this one woman who had very, very high rates with my mother, and my mother with that woman. And as my mom would tell about this, she said, I have a little bit of an ability to figure out, to anticipate, to know people's needs. And she used to play cards with my father, and they were, bridge, all the types of things that people did in the 1940s and 50s, and very fast, and they were very, very effective bridge partners. And as you know, you have to sort of read your cards and match your cards. So that was one of the ways in which she played with this. But when it came down to her philosophical analysis of this psychological experiment, she said what she learned is the remarkable intersection as well as dissolution of space and time. Now, when I discovered the yoga world, and through high school, I avidly read the collected works of Carl Jung as they were being published by Princeton University Press in the 60s and 70s. And what I discovered in looking closely at particularly his approach to dream and to image, to archetype, was that threads of reality flow in from all different directions, and that the dream is really quite a remarkable entry point for taking what Carl Jung would refer to as a journey into the unconscious, a journey into the collective unconscious. And with this, we see what Whitehead would call a moment of concrescence, a collapse of the difference between past, present, future, a collapse of the difference between seer, processes of seeing, and that which is seen. And what's to be learned from this? And I think that for my mother, it was let go and let be. She'd had many challenges in her life. And the same for me, that when you get over yourself in those moments of collapse, when you get over sort of holding what's happening right now, I want it to be this way, that if you're able to relinquish that grasping, a little bit of peace can enter in.
Opening up to something bigger is what I'm hearing. Like,
Or smaller. Yeah.
or smaller. Smaller, but feeling the less contraction. So the contraction is the bind. So I think that's where I'm going with bigger. Once we let go of a bind, there's an expanse. Not that you have to locate it anywhere, but some kind of relief or release. And then opening up an awareness, could we say?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the yoga text, it culminates with a state called Dharma Mega Samadhi, where there is a dehi, a vision of going up close, some putting it together. And in that particular definition, everything becomes a cloud of virtue. So that automatically what needs to be done will be done. And there's simultaneously this drifting, if you will, in a positive way, where rather than being fixated on the solidity of ice or the certainty of water with water vapor, that third sattvic form that water takes, the cloud, we're able to let our imaginations soar and really go where we need to go and do it lightly.
I love that you started to unpack the term samadhi. So if we're looking at the yogic vision, the incredible expanse in the way of, it's both a discernment, right? Patanjali is absolutely about discernment, but also a linking together. So once again, these ideas of the implicate, explicate, I want to say it's expansive in the sense that that's where the liberation or the feeling of freedom comes from, that vision, as opposed to being bound inside of the complex or a struggle.
That's such a beautiful way to describe that experience. And my yoga teacher, Anjali, put it this way in a song: Purusha, that consciousness, bound from within without looking on, which says that as long as we're wrapped up in our clinging, thinking, ego-based mind, we're inside ourselves in a way that can only be remedied by taking that other view, taking the long view, taking that more expansive view that's associated with Purusha. Yeah, very, very beautiful. I love how you use that word binding.
And we're right back at Jung here as well. The Jungian complexes, the yogic samskaras. I mean, there's really a meeting of those two systems of thought right there, for sure. So yes, the unbinding and samadhi, you defined it, and I know there's the placing, the putting together. There's a couple ways to get in there, I think, to unpack the definition of that term, but it is a key term. We see it several times throughout the Yoga Sutras. It's the aim, if you will, of the meditative practice to rest in that absorption. So from using that term, samadhi, is there a way to, and maybe you will need more terms like prajna, pratibha, but to continue to unfold that vision as you see it of a, I want to say, potential holographic reality that Patanjali puts forth?
Yeah, the beautiful thing is that what Patanjali provides, particularly and the third pada is the method to both put together and take apart and regenerate that holistic holographic reality. So there's a term introduced in the third pada called samyama, and it means to put together, to sort of connect, to restrain the three inner limbs of yoga: dharana, dhyana, samadhi. And when one comes out of the samadhi, okay, and samadhi is the lucidity, the pure sattva state that arises at the culmination of a meditative practice. And for many people, they don't know what's going on, but shavasana, the end of yoga class, that's the moment. Yeah, Leanne.
Well, I just want to make sure for our viewers who might not know dharana, dhyana, that we define those for them. So the concentration, meditation, absorption. Yeah.
Exactly.
Samyama is all three together.
Yes. And we build through, the yamas, the niyamas, the asana, the pratyahara, into dharana, into that state of concentration. And I'll describe a couple of different ways of moving into it and coming out of it. When we put those concentration, meditation, and samadhi, which is like a state of being whelmed, it's a state of being completely absorbed. It's a state in which the ego drops. It's a state that we know when we fall in love. Okay, it's that sort of elegant best self moment. But what do we do then when we come out of it? And it's a little bit like you've climbed a mountain. And those of us who I regularly go out to Joshua Tree, climb Ryan Mountain, you go up, and all of a sudden you have to come down. And coming down is actually more treacherous. Right? My wife had a bad fall, broke a bone, and it was not on the ascent, it was on the descent. And I'm only using this as a metaphor for the care in which we need to plant each step. So what it says about this process of climbing that mountain is that when you re-enter, you first come back into, everything has disappeared, then you come back into your samadhi. And then as you begin to re-engage with the world, you enter into a state called ekagrita. And ekagrita means one-pointedness, okay? Holding, gra, eka, to one thing. And that as you descend, and Sri Aurobindo called this the descent of consciousness, you are said to achieve victory over the senses, victory over the elements, which means that rather than being driven to do what you had always done habitually, you are empowered, quite literally empowered, to direct your focus and actually choose the terms of engagement, okay? And out of this, all manner of wonderful things can happen. And if, as we just had the Hunter's Moon in October, and the newspapers were filled, and I'm sure on the internet, like, the moon's going to be extra large, the moon's going to seem like it's special close. And then, the phone, and actually it's so interesting that the cell phone was in many ways inspired by the telepathy stories of the yogis. And if we look at Steve Jobs, if we look at Zuckerberg, they paid very, very close attention to the psychic ability narratives in the autobiography of a yogi published by Paramahansa Yogananda. And now we're all walking around with these powerful computers in our pocket that rarefy and focus our senses. And it's not just a curious analogy, but what are they doing? They're tapping, these phones are tapping into that morphic field, which is not an abstraction, but is actually real. And I always have my students, and I'd learned this from Dora Koons, a senior theosophist, that our bodies, and then I remind them of Walt Whitman, we sing the body electric, that our bodies are both suffused with electric charge, but surrounded with electric charge that is palpable, that is transferable, and that is sort of our own miniature correlate to the largeness of the body of the universe itself. So as one, for instance, I started talking about the moon, if you follow through with that concentration, even in small ways, and then notice, oh, the moon rises in its fullness just as the sun is going down. And then as it goes through 7 days of waning to half, and then 7 days going all the way to new moon, and then slowly returning, that this gives a little bit of joy in terms of understanding how this body, your body, my body, all of our individual bodies are standing in relationship with the heavenly bodies. One of my favorite practices is to go to a ridge side near my home, up above an elementary school, and I can literally see the sun rise 100 miles away. And it's just this magical place from which you have this vista. And what I do year after year after year after year is get out there at sunrise and track the southerly course of the sun in the winter, and then the northerly course of the sun in the summer. And it just gives you that feeling of connection that's celebrated in the Gayatri Mantra. Another example, and this is straight out of the Yoga Sutras, is to look at the North Star. And we camp every spring in Joshua Tree, where the stars are at their fullest, at their best. It's dark, dark, dark. And when it's a clear night, and I'll get up a few times during the night and I'll see the Big Dipper slowly rotate, starting on the eastern horizon, rising like the sun in the middle of the night, directly above the North Star, and then setting like the sun, but always pointing to that North Star. And it becomes not only a metaphor for constancy, but it also gives a sense of certainty. And I'll just share something that sort of translates this into a little bit of healing, a little bit of therapeutics, is that when one reaches a certain age, for my wife and I, we were in our mid-30s, that it would happen about, every 10 years, another set of people would pass. And as one, goes a little bit on the gray side and a little bit more with visible age, all of a sudden, not only is it the elders, but it's also one's peers. We just lost a dear friend and colleague and mentor who passed away the day before yesterday. My wife and I just held each other. And as I wrote to her children, I shared with them, without giving the whole backstory, something that brought me great solace. And I, about a couple of years ago, had lost a number of people, colleagues, revered colleagues, and I was a little bit down in the dumps. and grieving is real. Grieving is not to be denied. But what the Bhagavad Gita says is that, we all take on these bodies like we take on clothes, and we all change our clothes. We all change our bodies. So very fine. It's, nice to hear those sorts of things at funerals, but still you're sad. And we were doing ceremony with a Native American elder up in the Santa Monica Mountains above Beverly Hills. And he arrayed us. There were about probably 40 people gathered there for a special initiation and recognition of meditation teachers. And I just love learning new things. And he arrayed the entire assembly according to their birthdays, so that people that were born in January were to the north, people that were born in March were to the east, people that were born in June were to the south, people that were born in September were to the west, all the way back up to north. And at first I was like, what? We were like, where do we go? What is this? And then the teaching came. And the teaching, which I've carried, and again, this is not unrelated to that third pada of the Yoga Sutra, a sutra sequence that encourages us to uncover and discover our emplacement within the cosmos, quite literally, is that the Father rises in the east, the children celebrate and play to the south, that the mothers, that womb, that matrix is to the west, and that all of the ancestors gather to the north. So I wrote to my friends, the children of the person who passed, your mother is dancing in the north in good company. And again, these are sort of the healing benefits. And I also want to talk a little about dream. And so much of what has happened in my life, and I'm not special because I've been doing a study, an informal study, a non-IRB study, International Research Board study. But every semester I have many, many new students, and I somewhere during the semester will ask them. Many of them are young, not all of them, but I'll say, how many of you have had a dream that then you realized as something happened to you that anticipated a reality within your life? Every human has had this experience.
Like a precognitive dream, you mean? It's like a precognitive dream.
Yeah. And it's the way humans are hardwired. It's that reality of the collapse of time and space that my mother spoke of, that she had discerned by participating in this affirmation of psychic abilities. And what I find so revelatory, and I myself feel really quite personally blessed, is that many times dreams, and I have kept a dream journal for so many decades, but there will be dreams that recur. And when they present themselves in reality, sometimes I don't immediately remember the dream, but then the remembrance of the dream just affirms this is what not only was to be, but this is what was, this is what is. And in that, there is a standing, an understanding, and a sort of a blessing of being situated, of being established. And by that, I mean healed and being okay.
It reminds me of like the transactional interpretation in quantum physics, where the future's coming back to like handshake, and yes, drop these notes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because many people do have precognitive dreams. And there's some great research out there also around 9/11 and very significant events that humanity has gone through. I want to unpack a little bit what you're saying about the ascent and the descent. Because it's up and out, down and in, right? And the descent is the grounding, is the presencing, could we say, of the whole holographic reality of the if we want to say Satchitananda, there's other terms certainly, but definitely the grounded presence. And when you speak to the one pointed transformation, the ekagrata parinama, Patanjali uses that term parinama, the transformation, in the third chapter. So now we're talking about the samyama, which is the concentration, meditation, absorption, all together. And he brings up that the ideas of the transformation at that point, because once we are, let's say, in more of a holographic reality or have that yogic vision, the call to, perhaps we could say, transform the complexes, the binds. I don't know if we want to use the term completely, but I think we can. So yeah, I'm looking to unpack that idea of the samskaras of the parinama, where we're halting the outgoing thought form because we're looking for a greater sense of balance in the oneness, in the ground, still, even at that point. I mean, Patanjali even gives the warning, don't get lost in the psychic phenomena. And that's even not what this conversation is about, right? We're looking to put the context to the holograph. So but he does, again, he's very adamant. You don't want to get lost in the psychic phenomena, but what you're saying about the descent is so important, because to ground, there has to be a stability. And so you brought up ritual, you brought up ancestors. These are a way of ritual, for sure, is a way of stabilizing on the ground as this, again, whether we use the term expanse or wider vision or enfolded vision, becomes more online. It's a both and one without the other leaves us or leads us towards an imbalance. So that place where Patanjali brings in that parinama, I think, is really important in that chapter, because he's talking about the halting of the outgoing, the naroda of the samskaras that are what I would say Jungian complex, the vasanas, but using the samskara of the samadhi. So yeah,
Exactly.
Is there anything?
Like it says, yeah, what I want to do is profile two words, pratiprasava, and the word that you've brought to us, parinama. Now, pratiprasava is that process of going inward. And it comes from the verb root su, which is the base Indo-European word for to sew. So rather than sewing out your fabric, sava, you sew it, you unravel it in a sense, you bring it back inward. So you go against the propensity to unfurl, you gather it back in, and you understand. You sort of understand the color, you understand the threads, you understand the pattern. And that's that moment of samadhi. And then I love parinama. Okay, parinama. So pratiprasava, the sewing, and then like, where did this all come from? You learn that, and then you do parinama, that descent, which is from the verb root nam. And this is the same as we get with namaste. And you bow outward, pari, with a new intentionality. So you've gathered it in, and now you're unfurling a little bit like Our Lady of Guadalupe and that whole narrative about the roses that she bestowed on Juan, where all of a sudden everything has stopped and then everything begins again. What regular sadhana allows is a clearing of what was, a clearing of what we want things to be. And in one yoga text that I've translated called the Yoga Bindu, you work toward this moment where you cut the thread of expectation. Having understood what was, simply to dwell with acceptance with what is. And then as you move forward, you're able to truly spark a contribution, a creativity that allows you from that ground to be in a place of Dharma, in a place of holding things together. And I love, again, another turn of phrase from Patañjali was karma, you do for mother, Dharma, you hold your mother. And that is Dharma made a samadhi, that, then how do you live Jivan Mukta? You live from that place of freedom.
Wonderful. And again, I want to keep getting in there to unpack two weaknesses, I think. One in the Jungian camp, and also perhaps Patanjali, or maybe in the Hindu philosophical system overall. Definitely in Jungian psychology, a weakness, if you will, is the attachment theory, or the development, early childhood development, even though it's all over the psychology, because Jung's mother was hospitalized when he was only 3 years old. And he goes on to say that there was a struggle if ever he developed the ability to trust the feminine or woman. So it significantly impacted his own psychic development. And attachment theory is a big science now in the West, and some of that research shows that 50% of us are insecurely attached. And it's not something that's particularly highlighted in Patanjali psychology, not that it would need to be, but oftentimes that bind around early childhood attachment, or lack thereof, is such a blind spot that yoga can feel great, and the ascent, and the integration of certain rituals and even realms of experience, and the insecure attachment, human to human, can still go on for quite a period of time before it's even seen. Now, again, I don't know if there's anything you can particularly share coming out of the sutras, whether you see that in any way in your students. I just know in my end, from my practice and, the study of Western psychology and the Eastern liberatory psychologies. And again, having my practice where I have clients who are born in India, and it's like an awakening to them sometimes. Again, just anecdotal, because it's just my practice. But that idea, do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting because on the one hand, there are these seeming one-size-fit-all lists: hatred, greed, delusion. And that if we look at parental attachment issues or parental rejections, from where do they stem? And greed, I want more. I want my mom more. Delusion, she's always going to be there, or he's always going to be there. And then hatred, our disappointment when they let us down. Ultimately, we all get let down. And when you were talking about Jung being removed from his mother, I'm remembering when my mother went off to be in Girl Scout camp for a week when I was about probably 3. And my grandmother came and I was so not okay. And I remember the next year, my baby brother was born and he came home from the hospital. And I was like, oh, I don't know about this when I was 4. That, yeah. And then that sort of annoyance with my father that, yeah. And through just the journey of life, we discover that we have to find autonomy, that in the words of Jung, we do have to individuate, and that regardless of whether it's our own particular mother or father, the anima and the animus is always there, sort of lurking. And the cosmos always presents us the challenges that we need to retain that. Really, I'm going to call it Bhagavad Gita / Gandhian sense of true self. Okay, and that true self, as expressed by Mahatma Gandhi, is the self that remains unruffled in the midst of change. Now, as a parent, and our children are well launched, both married, but as a parent, we went through some things, particularly with teenagers, that were rugged. And without going into too many details, what my wife, who is an early childhood specialist, said, it's our job to be there for them, no matter what they do, because the universe always beats us up and they need safe space. And my parents had a similar approach. And when I was the out of control teenager, getting into trouble for this, that, or the other thing, what they would do in their wisdom is that they would just put me in the car, go for a 3-hour drive through the countryside, and that was it. And we would just look at stuff. Sometimes we talked, but most of it was they were there. And then I remember their relationship was always primary. They had 6 kids and they would go off and do whatever adventure they were doing together. And then they would come home and they would just sit in the car and talk for a long time. And what it modeled was, for us, was a healthy sense both of autonomy but reciprocity. And my parents were very different from one another, and that sort of, in the unfolding of everybody's personal life journey, all of those figuring outs fall into the category of what Patanjali calls vichara. And we talked earlier about dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, and samadhi. And in the first pada, he articulates the training wheels for this. And for instance, if one, as advised for more than 2,500 years, begins a concentration exercise by gazing upon a plate of earth, of soil, and threading one's thoughts into the texture, the shape, the color, and allow that to then go into the growing of plants out of that soil. Food, cotton, textiles, food, bodies, and see the foundational presence of earth, again, there can be a state of being absorbed, overwhelmed, of appreciative regard for the earth itself and all of the gifts of the earth. So that's sort of the training wheels. And you do that then with water, with fire, with air, with space. And then vichara is where, like, okay, that's concrete thought and action within the world. What about comportment? What about the way that I carry myself? What about the chariot? Okay, and vichar, all of those words that I mentioned are cousin words of this word char, to carry. And if I'm in a bad mood, what am I carrying? And then interrogating those, I just went through a little bit of family history, and I'm grateful because my parents had all of their struggles that they figured out with one another and sort of prepared me for a reflective life. But this vichara becomes the concentration. Okay. People have identified, okay, I have a cheerfulness that can be quite annoying to people and that I've had to grapple with. Believe me, it's a nice burden to carry, but it still has resulted in people being very angry with me. And the universe has held me in check, it's not always going to be okay, So that part of the personality sorting out goes to what the Sankhya system refers to as the linga, the markers that define our presence within the world. And ultimately, all of them are evanescent. None of them will be with us forever and ever and ever as markers. And where we end up is not just this abstraction of Satchidananda, but where we end up in moments of meditation, in moments of the collapse between past, present, and future, moments of collapse between the seer, the process of seeing, and that which is seen. We end up in the existence, things as they are, the awareness, but not an awareness that's ego-referential, but just that eternal presencing. And yes, it does bring us to a state of ananda, brings us to a state of bliss that sustains us and reassures us that, yeah, we're here, the world is here, and we got to do what we can.
Yeah, and it's not an overnight process. I think that's part of it, right? Like we sort of want to bring this vision forward of this holographic reality because it's important. If we are struggling, and it's the duality that's really the breakdown because the vision isn't clear enough or deep enough or something like that. Like there's a block, right? That's what it is, a vidya. A block in wisdom is a block in vision. But suffering doesn't end overnight. And I like where you're going, like with the elementals, especially when it comes to perhaps early childhood wounding. There's a couple things I picked up from what you're saying. It's like, yeah, Mother Earth, like, just the fecund nature of her richness, the purity of great water, like being able to really understand the elements. And also you brought up linga, mark, but also a linga without mark, like really surrendering back to the samadhi, the womb where there's no mark, and there can be a total restoration, if you will, or relaxation. But again, I don't want to make it sound like, and I don't think we are, that it happens overnight. This is a process of working with the mind, working with the body, working with the places where these complexes, where these blocks are, in meditation and inquiry, in order to release the binds so that wisdom and that vision and that holographic reality can come forward.
Yeah, and I want to bring it to sort of a little bit of an undoing of the Freudian emphasis on the parent, and call up and call in Rupert Sheldrake a little bit and point out something that is absolutely foundational and fundamental to the Asian worldview. And this is punarjanma. This is the notion that we have been here before, and that as our lingas find home in a body, they don't end up in this body without a long history. It's not just about your mother and father. And I remember my father, as I mentioned, had 6 children. And one of his favorite things was to go in the hospital, look in that bassinet, and just watch that baby. And he said, from the first day, we were manifesting our personalities. And on the one hand, yeah, we have these genetics that we get from our parents. But in those moments of psychological anguish, combined with sustained, long, silent meditations, there will be, and this is from my own experience, there will be depth memories that well up that are, according to the Jain tradition, you're going to get 3 sets. And those are your 3 lessons that you need to figure out in order to hopefully go on in your next birth to an even more auspicious state. But it's also a way of forgiveness of self, because no matter where those impulses came from, they came from hatred, greed, and delusion that were being enacted. In Sankhya, it says, why are we here? It's because we didn't finish everything that we yearned for, that we hankered for. We didn't finish some leftover hatred, and that, this life, this body, we're working it out. Now, that's a very psychological approach. And I also want to depersonalize it. And in one of my favorite reincarnation narratives, and I've delved into many of them over the years in the original and translated them, but this one story of Punya and Pavana from 1,000 years ago, and they are up in Rishikesh at Triveni, where these tributaries come into the Ganges. Beautiful, beautiful place. I've been to Arati there, and this was over 1,000 years ago. They have this lovely, fantastic relationship with their mother and father. Their father is a sage. Their mother is just always there for them. And the dad dies, and the younger brother falls into an inconsolable grief. And he just runs wailing into the forest. And after the elder brother finishes with the ignition of the funeral pyre and all of the requisite prayers, he finds his brother and sits him down and says, just sit here with me. And then they have the most beautiful conversation that goes on for a couple of chapters, where he says, look at those deer up on the bridge. Our mother and father, we aren't the only children that they've had in their many lives. And I know that our mother and father, they had been deer. And look at how beautiful those deer are. And then it goes throughout the forest. Look at that tree. Look how that tree expresses its being and its beauty. You were that tree. And then he retrieves the elder brother, his memories. I was this and I was that. And he's telling all these wonderful places that he has lived in prior births, human and otherwise. And then he teases his younger brother and says, yeah, and you were a this and you were a that. And you were an ant in the dunghill. And now you're here. And all of us have just celebrated life in so many different ways. It's going to be okay. And the younger brother, regains his composure. And it's just such an elegant story that is about ultimately, it really doesn't matter. Whatever it is that you've done. Yeah.
Well, now you're bringing back, and rightly so, the ideas of the holographic reality that every piece is contained in every other. So if the suffering is now there, and by going in, could we say that's the one pointed awareness? That one thing can take us in, which then expands us to the totality of it and the realization, oh, I am this whole thing, or, I'm the deer. Thich Nhat Hanh has a beautiful poem where he says, I'm the pirate and it's really, this part of it's dark, but I am the pirate. I am the woman raped. I can't remember the name of the...
I could never read that poem. I read it often in class and I always weep. It's embarrassing, but that, Thich Nhat Hanh.
So that's an amazing poem. So you're bringing up a few things here. The Sangha, also the fact that the healing does come about in community. So if there have been these very strenuous experiences in a family system, but there's still community to be had in order to presence oneself, to feel the warmth of the mammalian bodies. And the next Buddha is the Sangha. But this, again, it's so rich, the idea that I am the deer also, or I have been the deer in another lifetime. Are you familiar with how Bohm described or did that experiment with the ink in the glycerin?
Explain it for everybody, because
there was a medium of glycerin, and they dropped in a bit of ink, and then they used the shearing method, and they turned the ink around until it disappeared inside of the glycerin. And then when they started turning in the opposite direction, while they were turning, it was the smaller and smaller thread until it finally disappeared inside the glycerin. And then they turned in the opposite direction, and that ink dot made its way back to its full self again. So this idea of the implicate explicate, this when we have this one point of focus and we follow it all the way back, through the marks or to that unmarked place into the samadhi, but then you can trace it back out again. And again, it allows us to sit comfortably in the body, in the dance of this constantly changing phenomena, because even though it's one pointed, it's kind of like a movie roll, right? Where it's a different frame. Even if it's the same frame, it's still moving and moving, but the stillness is in the seeing. So again, lots of richness there with that story that you told about the deer. And
I love the humanity of that story, because all of us have sort of felt our hearts rise up with joy when we spot a deer as we're driving in the countryside, and there's a deer. Or we look up and there's geese flying in formation. And to name that kinship that we innately feel is a powerful moment, returning us to the fullness not only of our humanity, but of our very life.
Yeah. Anything else to share about that process of prati-prasava and the explicate turning back into the implicate? I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything else you feel called to share about any of that? I'm thinking of Sutra 333 as I say that to you, where Patanjali says all else by intuition. Again, through this process in that chapter, certainly the samyama. Yeah.
I think that the whole list of psychic phenomena, including retrieval of past life memories, is included in that third pada. And when I think of, so much of what in my now long lifetime that I've been able to witness, including the rise of bodybuilding, okay, which is a long tradition within India, and it became mainstreamed. When I think of the telepathy of the cell phone, that we're able to send our thoughts and even write them down in text, that this is something anticipated, the clairvoyance component, and we've made it ever more real. When I think of the just the narrative of self-understanding and the narrative that includes the journey that is taking into account present realities, past realities, anticipating futures. And then looking at the ever important message that comes through in Patanjali again and again: don't take yourself seriously, because too many people have garnered a fair amount of personal power and then inflicted that upon others. And what I think we all need throughout human history is to guard constantly against what in theological terms is antinomianism, that the rules apply to everybody else, they don't apply to me. And this brings me right back to the first practice of Ahimsa, that to the extent that we can even think of ourselves as spiritual beings, we must abide in that vow to do no harm. And so much harm has been done in the name of power, of spirituality, of religion, not only in those domains, but so much harm has been done exercising power over. And the minute we lapse from the good old-fashioned 10 Commandments and whether in the Hebraic form of the Mosaic Law or in the tenfold precepts of whatever tradition, Buddhist, Jain, in the yoga tradition, Ahimsa, nonviolence, Satya, tell the truth, Asteya, don't steal, Brahmacharya, do not behave inappropriately to any other human body without full agreement and preferably vow. Do not hoard. Be your best pure self. Be happy. Be austere, okay? Be studious. Be faithful, okay? The 10 yoga commandments. And we need these. And the minute that we violate really any one of those, we've hurt the world.
Mm.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was going to say, is certainly like as spiritual teachers, don't take self too seriously so that power and balance comes. But also, I think on the spiritual student end, it's take oneself seriously enough so the power over game isn't there as well. So really, in the end, it's all about balance, and it's the balance of power within oneself, between oneself and other, between oneself and the world. I mean, in the end, it's all relational. And I brought up 333, all else by intuition. And then I do think it's the next sutra where Patanjali, it's one of my favorites, Patanjali says, by samyama, concentration, meditation, and absorption into the heart center, we come to know the mind. So again, like you're pointing out, And as we've said, the sutras themselves are, in a sense, holographic. Each sutra is implied in the next sutra. Like they are a thread that work together in a beautiful, harmonious way. And that all else by intuition, and then that heart center, like knowing the mind and the heart, and the mind-heart connection is just such a important, significant, crucial component of yoga.
Yeah, and I love how it starts with the belly, and then it goes up to the throat, then goes up to the ajna, then it goes up to the sahasrara, and it says, but bring it all back to the heart. And yeah, and that brings us to Ahimsa. That brings us to that place of a love that knows no bounds.
Right. A non-violence, because there is no other. That everything that you do, you're doing to yourself ultimately. Beautiful, Chris. Anything else you care to share today?
Well, I'm brought to the conclusion of the Mahabharata. And if we have a few more minutes, I would like to share that story. And I'm going to share it both in terms of a scholar or a student discovering this book, of a theater goer who, like, what? How did this particular narrative unfold? And then the perspective of a scholar that went back in and did translation that explains. Now, to give a little bit of the background, the Mahabharata begins and announces it's going to say everything that could ever be said, and that everything that exists in the universe is in this big text. And it's 7 times the length of the Iliad and Odyssey combined. It's been conveyed orally for thousands of years, and it has been hardwired into the culture of remote or far-flung places, such as Indonesia, and enacted in shadow puppets and plays. And when it comes to this, there's 5 great protagonists, born of 4 different gods. And the eldest of these 5 brothers, Yudhishthira, is the son of Dharma. The second oldest is the son born of Bhima, the great wind, the great god Vayu. The third is the son born of Indra, the heroic warrior of the Rig Veda. And then numbers 4 and 5 are born from the twin-headed sun god. So one from the rising sun and the other from the setting sun. And they have a joint wife called Draupadi. And after they are successful in battle, after they have done everything that they needed to do, after they have ruled for a long time over a peaceable kingdom and have emplaced one of their children to continue governing, they recall the best time of our life was our escape into the mountains. Let us return to the mountains to meditate, to find our true self. Now, as they are going higher and higher and higher, the burden of their karmic load literally pulls them down. And human, all too human. And one by one, and those of us that have been up to Mussoorie, up to the Himalayas, or up to Big Bear in Southern California, you look down and there's a 3,000-foot drop or more. And I think all of us, I just earlier had said my wife fell on the mountain, broke something. And I think probably all of us know someone who fell off a mountain and died. So as Draupadi, following her husband's, loses her footing, falls into the abyss, into death. And then Sahadeva, they stumble. They try to grab and support each other, but they pull each other down into the abyss. And then Arjuna, born of the great warrior, himself a great warrior, falls the 3,000 feet to his death. Bhima, the strongest, even his strength cannot save him. Yudhishthira, the eldest, carries on, looking back, feeling sadness, but with the companionship of a dog that came for the walk. And I think all of us have been hither or yon when a dog all of a sudden shows up and walks along with you for a while. And they develop this really loving rapport. And then Yudhishthira gets there. He gets to the gates of heaven. Okay, and the Tushita heaven is the heaven from which the Buddha himself descended, and the heavens above. And he was about to just go into that final place of beatitude when a voice booms out and says, "You, Yudhishthira, you, born of virtue, are qualified to enter heaven. But your dog, that dog, gotta go. There are no dogs in heaven." And Yudhishthira looks at the dog and says to that voice, "I like this dog, and I don't want to be in a heaven where there are no dogs," right? So all of a sudden, the dog disappears, and it turns out that the dog and the voice were his own father, Dharma, virtue. So he enters into heaven, and what does he see there? He sees his hated cousins already there, all of these people that he had killed in the horrific battle of the Mahabharata. He sees the people that fought virtuously for him, but he goes from room to room, and, as the Bible has it, many rooms in the great mansion, and nowhere can he find his co-wife, nowhere can he find his brothers. And his father is with him and sort of looks up his, I suppose, right shoulder and says, "Dad, where are my brothers and our wife?" And he says, "You want to see them?" Well, he opens a trap door, okay? And this was in stage production, beautifully, beautifully done. And then he climbs down this ladder deeper and deeper and deeper. And the stench and the moans and the crying and the alternating stifling heat and freezing cold, he goes into that realm portrayed by Hermannus Bosch, into hell. And out of the darkness, he hears his wife Draupadi say, "Are you here?" And he hears Sahadeva and Nakula, his youngest brothers, say, "Are you here?" And he hears Arjuna and Bhima say, "Oh, we're so glad you're bringing a fresh breeze. You're bringing moderate temperatures." And the sighs and the moans begin to go. And then his father says, "Well, they are here in hell because of all of the things, all of the nasty things that they did. And you've completed your mission. Now that you've experienced hell, I can set you free to rejoin all those others in heaven." And Yudhishthira, that son of Dharma, says, but can they come? And Dharma says, no, they were nastier than you were. So he says, I would rather stay here and endure the torments of hell and bring them this little bit of relief than to selfishly just save myself. So with that, Dharma, his father, says, son, you have learned all life's lessons. And like the closing soliloquy in Grapes of Wrath, where Henry Fonda says, wherever there are people suffering in the world, I will go there. I will support them. Wherever goodness prevails, there we find Yudhishthira, there we find Dharma. Every time we see that beautiful sunrise and that beautiful sunset, there we find Sahadeva and Nakula. Wherever there is strength and valor, Indra now is free. Indra, whenever you connect with those qualities, you engage and encounter Indra. And wherever you find that power of your own breath, Bhima, now free, is within that power. So I just love that story because it takes us to the heights, it takes us to the depths, it takes us to who are we, and again, Draupadi, wherever there is the generosity of mother, there we find that place of pratibha, that place of shanti, that place of a fulfillment that gives us purpose, gives us meaning, and ultimately gives us the work that we need to do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And what came forward for me is, yes, family, but the community, the power of community, the power of relationship, the power of interconnectivity. So, Chris, thank you for sharing the Mahabharata, and thank you for sharing all your wisdom as we take a look at the yoga vision. And yeah, I appreciate you coming and sharing again with our community.
Well, thank you. It's really been an honor. And it's funny because I was looking at our screen collectively here, and I thought your red book was my red book, which is just over that shoulder a little bit. So, and I've got both versions that you have. So yeah, on the same page, quite literally.
Yeah, quite literally. Yeah, thank you so much. For those of you watching and listening, thank you for being with us. You're the reason that we're here in community, exploring our common unity.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.